Good morning. How's everybody doing? So for y'all who may be visiting, my name is Matthew Pennell, and I'm the preaching pastor here at Christ Church. And first of all, I just want to say, obviously, it's a big day today, right? For all the mothers in the room. So first of all, I just want to say happy Mother's Day to all your mothers in here. We're really glad that you're here with us today, whether this is your home church or you're just here visiting. Man, we're thankful for you, and thank you for all the mothers out there. And actually, I just want to take a quick moment to say something to my mom. My mom had surgery this past Friday, and she's actually still in the hospital in Raleigh recovering. So, Mom, if you're watching online, happy Mother's Day. I love you, and we're praying for you, and hope to see you back here 100% really soon. So, happy Mother's Day, everybody else here, and happy Mother's Day, Mom. We love all of y'all. As I've been reading through the passage this week, and you can see it there in your bulletins, we'll be going through Exodus chapters 1 through 4 today. We'll be spending time there, and I kept coming back to this thought. Some of the most powerful moments in life usually don't happen when everything feels crystal clear to us. They don't usually happen when we've got the perfect plan, or when we know exactly what to do, or when everything feels under our control. You know, honestly, a lot of the most important things in life happen right at the edge. The edge of what it is that we can control, the edge of what it is that we can fix, the edge of what we can carry. And if we're honest in here today, for a lot of us, that edge, guess what? It shows up in parenting. Like, we know that full well. In those moments when you realize that you've done everything you can for your child. You've prayed for your child. You've taught your child. You've sacrificed for your child. You've stayed up late at night agonizing over decisions for your child. You've had those hard and tough conversations with your child. You've tried to guide them the absolute best that you can, and now you're standing there realizing that I can't make this decision for them anymore. I can't fix this problem that they're going through right now. I can't carry this burden for them any further than I can right now. And look, that's not because us as parents that we don't care. Like, we know we care deeply about our kids. You know, it's kind of like the idea of a mother bird. You know, a mother bird eventually nudging her baby out of the nest. At some point, she knows that she can't fly for her babies. You know, she trusts that all of the preparation and the strength that they've been gaining over the years have led to that moment where they leave the nest. And that creates a tension with us too when we think about our lives as parents in that way. You know, we have those moments where we have to ask ourselves, do I hold on tighter in these moments, or do I trust God with who it is that I love the most? And that place is what we're going to call today the water's edge. And what is fascinating is that's exactly where one of the most important stories of the Bible begins. Because if you know Exodus 1 through 4, you know eventually that we get to Moses floating in that basket down the Nile River. But before any of that happens, we need to understand the kind of world that all of this is taking place in. Because if you don't actually feel the weight of what it is that's going on in Egypt, you won't really feel the beauty of what these women in this story do for Moses. So let's go to Exodus chapter 1 together. And before we read it, let's just remember what book in the Bible comes right before Exodus. Genesis. That's right. And in Genesis, what does God do? God makes promises. He makes promises to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. He makes promises about a people, a future, a blessing that was spread throughout the entire earth. And by the time you get to Exodus, you're starting to watch those promises happen in real time. God's people are growing, they're multiplying, they're spreading. So let's read together in Exodus 1, starting in verse 6. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Man, what you see there in Exodus, that's the life promised in Genesis. Growth and flourishing. God's people are multiplying and filling the land just like God said they would. This is Genesis language. Be fruitful, be multiply, fill the earth. God's blessing is spreading. But then just a verse later, everything changes in this story. Then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing, came into power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. We're told here that a new king comes, a new Pharaoh, one that doesn't know Joseph. He doesn't remember what God had done through Joseph. What this Pharaoh sees is he sees a growing group of people that he can't control. And instead of seeing that life for these people, that multiplication as a blessing, this Pharaoh sees it as a threat. And fear starts driving everything that he does from that moment forward. So what does Pharaoh do? He tightens his control. We read in verse 12, but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor and brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. So what does the Pharaoh do? He enslaves them. He works them ruthlessly. He makes their lives bitter. And underneath all that, Pharaoh is trying to stop what it is that God is doing. In this story, we see a God that is bringing life, and Pharaoh is trying to shut that life down. But what does it say in the story? It doesn't work, though. The more they are oppressed, the more they multiply. Life keeps pushing through. So what does Pharaoh do? Pharaoh escalates. And this is where things in the story take a dark turn. If we continue reading in verse 15, we read these words. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. Kill the boys. This isn't just simple oppression anymore. This is an attack of Pharaoh on life itself. And don't miss what's going on here in this story. This isn't just simply aimed at the baby boys. It is aimed at the future of the Israelites. Pharaoh thinks that he can stop the next generation, then he can stop the people of God altogether. But right here, when Pharaoh thinks that he's tightening his control, this is where God quietly begins his rescue. And he begins it through women. Women who step in the life of Moses, women who protect life, women who trust God when everything around them says to fear. And that's where this story meets us here today. Because long before Moses leads Israel out of Egypt, long before God parts the Red Sea, God begins his rescue through the courage of women who choose to protect life when it matters most. And that is the main point that we will be tracing today, that God uses courageous women to protect life and to begin his rescue. Pray with me today. Father, thank you. Thank you for this day that we can gather together as your people, Father. Thank you for your word. Thank you for your promises. Thank you for your rescue, Father. Thank you for the courageous acts of so many people throughout history, Father. But most of all today, we celebrate the courageous acts of the mothers in our lives, Father. Thank you for them. I pray that you would just continue to use them as your story in the lives of those people who they are placed in to touch, Father. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So jumping back into Exodus, let's just slow down for a second this morning, because this is one of those moments that it's really easy in the Bible to just rush past. But if you really step into what's happening here in this story is intense. You have Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, the most powerful person in the whole entire land, and he has spoken this decree. And his command, it is clear. Baby boys are to die. And standing right in the middle of all that are these two women. These two women don't represent the power or authority of Pharaoh. They're just two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. And what these women show us immediately is that courage chooses life when the world around it chooses death. Courage chooses life when the world chooses death. So let's look at what these two midwives do in the story after this decree. The midwives, however, they feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. They feared God, and they didn't do what Pharaoh told them to do. That is the decision right there in the story, because they are standing between two voices in their lives. Pharaoh, the most powerful man that they know, and God, the one that they ultimately answer to. And they have to decide in that moment, whose voice is it that carries more weight? The text tells us exactly what shaped their decisions. They feared God. They took God seriously. They trusted that God's way mattered more than Pharaoh's command. So when those two voices collided, what did they do? They followed God. And that decision carried extreme weight because Pharaoh had already enslaved their entire people. He had already shown us what he was capable of. Disobeying Pharaoh wasn't something small. It put every single thing in their lives on the line. Their safety, their position, their very lives were on the line here. And still, they chose life. And then what does Pharaoh do? He calls them in and he asks them, what's going on? Why are all these boys still alive? Look at how the midwives answer Pharaoh. The midwives answer Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. I don't know what to tell you. Can you imagine standing there in front of Pharaoh and saying that? Basically, you're telling the most powerful man in Egypt, sorry, Pharaoh, these Hebrew women, they're just too quick for us. They're better than your Egyptian women. Man, that took courage, because what they're really saying is, we're not going to do what you told us to do. And at the same time, they're pointing to something deeper. No matter how hard Pharaoh tries to stop it, life keeps showing up. You feel that contrast in the opening chapters of Exodus. Pharaoh is trying to control and crush. These women are protecting and preserving. Why? Because God has always been about life. We worship a God who creates life, who blesses life, who protects life, who sustains life. And when something pushes against that, He raises up people willing to step in and say no. And sometimes that no, just like in this story, it doesn't come from people in power. It comes from people who simply step in and have courage to say no. And for a lot of us, some of the most courageous decisions that we've ever seen, they didn't happen in a public space. They happened at home, in quiet moments, in hard choices, in someone choosing what was right when it would have been a lot easier not to. And this is where Exodus should challenge all of us today, because it's easy to keep faith in the realm of our ideas and what we believe and what we say and what we agree with. But moments like this that are going on in Exodus remind us that faith shows up in our decisions. When doing the right thing is the harder thing to do. When staying quiet in a situation would be easier to do. When going along with the crowd would cost us a lot less. What are you going to do? Do you lean towards what's convenient? Or do you lean towards what's right? For a lot of us in here, this isn't hypothetical. We've had moments like this. Maybe not this extreme like it is in this case, but moments where we had to decide, am I going to speak up and say what's right, or am I going to remain quiet? Am I going to trust God here, or am I going to take the easier road? And what I love about these women in this story is they don't control the system around them. They don't get to change Pharaoh, but they do control one thing in the story. They control themselves. They control the decisions they make. And that's where courage shows up in this story. not in controlling every outcome around them, but in choosing what's right where you are. You know, most of the time, courage isn't loud in the moment. Courage doesn't draw attention to itself. It looks like a quiet decision. In a moment where no one's watching you, to do what's right anyway. And that kind of courage right there is exactly what God uses in this story to start a rescue. And that leads us into point number 2 today, because faith trusts God even at the water's edge. You know, eventually in this story, you leave, and all of a sudden this decree about killing all the baby boys, it all of a sudden becomes personal, because now the danger isn't simply just happening somewhere out there for these Hebrew women. No, now it's in someone's home. Now it's a mother holding her baby boy, knowing Pharaoh's command is hanging over this boy's life. And this is where in the story that we meet Moses' mother. Let's read the beginning of Exodus chapter 2 together. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. Now look, before I go any further in the story, I just want to say something and clear something up real quick. You know, a few years ago, I was preaching, and I tied this story and kind of summarized it in a sermon. And when I said this part that I just read right there, that Moses' mother hid him for 3 months, somebody here heard me say that she hit him for 3 months. And then she went home and told her husband, yeah, I don't know about that pastor there at Christ Church. He's a little off his rocker. You know, you know what he said in church today? He said that Moses' mother was hitting him. She was beating him for 3 months. So let me clear this up. She hid Moses, H-I-D. You know, one letter makes a big difference, right? Not hit. And honestly, this is one of those moments where it's funny because, you know, I still get to look back on this moment and laugh with this couple. You know, it's just one of those church moments that sticks with you. But what I want to highlight today is this. What comes right before that part where she says, where the Bible says that she hid him for 3 months. Because right before that, it says this. When she saw that he was a fine child. She saw that he was a fine child. Or more literally, that she saw that the child was good. And the Hebrew word used there for fine or good, it's the word tov. Can y'all say that with me? Tov. Tov. And guess what? That is the same word used all the way back in Genesis 1. When God looks at his creation and over again, he says, it is tov. It is good. It is good. It is very good. So do not miss what is happening here in this story. Pharaoh looks at the Hebrew boys and he sees them as a threat, something that he needs to eliminate. But his mother looks at her son and she sees what God sees. She sees goodness. She sees life. She sees something worth protecting. And that is exactly what she does. She hides him for 3 months to protect him. Man, as a mother in here, you have to feel the weight of that. Think about the extent of what you would go to protect your child. But also think about the fear and anxiety of this moment. Because you're dealing with a baby here. Every single cry matters. Every noise could expose them. And she's carrying that pressure every single day, doing every single thing that she can to keep him safe. But eventually, she reaches the end of what she can do. So let's keep reading in the story. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child along the bank. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. When she could hide him no longer. That line emphasizes what we were just talking about earlier. She didn't give up early. She did every single thing that she could. But there came a moment where she could not carry this anymore. That is what we're talking about this morning. That is the water's edge, the place where you still carry deeply about your child, but you realize that your control over their life is gone. So what does she do in this story? She makes a basket. You know, that word translated basket is interesting here because it is actually the exact same Hebrew word that is used for Noah's Ark. The ark and basket, same Hebrew word. So this isn't just simply a basket for Moses. It's literally a picture of God's rescue. She covers it. She places her baby inside of it and sets it among the reeds of the Nile. Think about that for a second. The Nile, the place that Pharaoh decreed as a place for death. Throw your boys into the river. That's where they were supposed to be thrown to drown and die. And now here is Moses' mother placing him in a basket and putting him before those waters of death. She takes that place and entrusts her child there with God too. She knows that she can't remove the danger. She knows that she can't control this outcome, but she can trust God with what she can't carry anymore. That is what faith looks like. Then the story gives us Miriam. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Miriam, Moses' sister, she's close enough to watch in this moment, but not close enough to control anything. She's present, but she's not in charge. And sometimes that is what faith looks like in our lives. Not walking away or giving up, but staying there, watching, waiting, trusting God with what it is that we can't reach. And this is where Exodus starts challenging us today as parents. Because parenting starts with holding on to your kids, caring them, protecting them, staying close to them. But over time, you realize love isn't just about holding on to them. Sometimes love actually means letting go. Not because we don't care for our kids anymore, but because we know that our kids ultimately don't belong to us. They belong to God. And man, as a parent, that's a hard one. Because there are moments where we realize that we can still love them. We can still pray for them. I can still speak life and truth into their lives, but I can't control what my kids do. Man, that's tough. And for some of you, this situation that I'm talking about, it's not just hypothetical for you right now. That's actually where you are in your life right now. You've done what you can. You've prayed. You've tried to guide them. And now you're watching and waiting and trusting. And I just want you to hear this clearly today. God sees that. God sees what you're doing. You know, we actually see a glimpse of this in another place in Scripture. Think about Hannah. Think about Hannah in 1 Samuel 1. Listen to what Hannah says. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord, for his whole life will be given over to the Lord. Man, listen to Hannah's words. How hard they are, but yet how powerful those words are. I prayed for this child. God, thank you for this child, but now, God, I give this child over to you. That's not a lack of love. Man, that is a deep, deep trust. And just like Hannah, Moses' mother is living that same type of faith. She places her son in that ark. She sets him in the waters of death and trusts God with what she cannot control. It's kind of like teaching your kid to ride a bike. You know, at first you're holding on and you're running beside them and you're helping to keep them steady. But then there's that moment that you know if your kid's going to ride, you're going to have to let go. And everything inside of you wants to grab hold of that bike again, to hold the back seat. But here's the thing. If you never let go, they will never learn to ride. Because in that moment, we know as a parent that letting go of them doesn't mean that we stop loving our kids. It means that we're trusting God with what we can't hold anymore. That's what Moses' mother does here in this story. She lets go. But she doesn't give up on Moses. She trusted God. She trusts God with what she cannot carry any longer. That is the kind of faith that we need. That is faith at the water's edge. And then God shows up again in this story. And what we see next in this story is that God works through the unexpected. So continuing on in Exodus, now Moses is in the water in his little ark that his mother has made for him, hidden among the reeds, completely out of his mother's hands. And then somebody starts walking down towards the water. And look, if this was a movie scene, this is the part where the tension starts building. You hear footsteps. You see the shadow of somebody coming and you're thinking, this is it. This is the moment in the movie. What's going to happen here? It's got you on the edge of your seat. So let's keep reading here in Exodus 2:5. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. You know, you read this and you see Pharaoh's daughter, and you're thinking, oh no, not Pharaoh's daughter in this story. Out of all the people who could show up in that moment, this is the last person that we would expect. This is the daughter of the man who had just given the command to kill all the Hebrew boys. She's part of Pharaoh's household. She knows exactly what it is that she's looking at. She sees it and she says, I know, this is a Hebrew baby. And she knows the command of her father. And what does she do? She still chooses compassion. She still chooses life over death. Think about that contrast in this story. Pharaoh is pushing everyone towards death, and his daughter pulls life up out of the water. The very place that was meant for death becomes the place where rescue begins again. And then Miriam, Moses' sister, steps in at exactly the right moment. She's been watching at a distance. She's been waiting. She's been paying attention. And she goes up and she's like, to Pharaoh's daughter, she's like, you want me to go find like one of the Hebrew women maybe and like help you out, nurse this baby? Like, can I help you out with this? And Pharaoh's daughter, the crazy thing is she says yes. And guess what the irony of this story is? Suddenly Moses' very own mother is brought back into the picture. And she's not only brought back into the picture, she's actually paid to care for her own son. Think about that for a second. Pharaoh enslaves the Hebrew people, and his own daughter is now providing for one. The system of Pharaoh's day says one thing, but God is doing something entirely different here. And this is often how God works. Not always through the people that we expect in our lives, but sometimes through people that we've completely overlooked. And you see this all throughout Scripture if you're paying attention. Take Rahab, for instance, a Canaanite woman outside of the people of God, and yet she becomes part of the story of rescue that ultimately leads to Jesus. Or think about Ruth, a Moabite woman, a Moabite widow who is another woman who is an outsider. And yet God weaves her into the line of David that ultimately leads to Jesus. And then there's Mary, a young woman from a small town with no status or influence, and God chooses her to be the one who carries the Messiah into the world. Over and over and over again, God works through unexpected people to accomplish his purposes. And I think that matters for us because we often assume that we already know that God's work is supposed to look like. We put expectations on how God should move or who he should use or what that answer should look like in our lives. And God's probably, looking down on us laughing in those moments. Because God has never been limited to our expectations. Sometimes he's already working in the places that we wouldn't even think to look. Sometimes through people we would have never expected God to use. And when you step back and you look at Exodus, you can see it clearly. God is already putting things together, even when nobody else can see it yet. What started with a mother at the water's edge now continues through Pharaoh's daughter at that same water's edge. The daughter of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, who doesn't even realize she is actually part of the true king's plan. The true king. That's what's incredible about this whole story. God's work is always bigger than just one person. Even when people can't see it. Even when people don't realize it, God is still at work behind the scenes. And that leads us to one final moment in Exodus. Because there's one more time when somebody steps in right when it matters the most. And that brings us to our final point today. That God also uses those who are closest to you. If you know the story of Exodus, then you know that it doesn't end at the river. Moses grows up in Pharaoh's household. And years later, he has to flee Egypt for his life. Then after his encounter with God at the burning bush, God calls Moses to go back to Egypt. And it's during that time that we pick back up in the story because Moses starts heading back to the very place where all of this began. And on the way, something crazy happens. Let's read that in Exodus chapter 4, beginning in verse 24. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me," she said. So the Lord let him alone. At that time, she said, "bridegroom of blood," referring to circumcision. Man, this is a strange passage, right? Look, honestly, there is a lot that we could talk about in this passage, but I just want to focus on what the passage actually makes clear here today. What the passage makes clear is that Moses' life is in danger. And the one who steps in to save that life is Zipporah, his wife. She sees what needs to be done and she acts. And she acts quickly and decisively. And in that moment, we are told that she actually saves Moses' life. And when you step back and you look at Exodus 1 through 4 as a whole, you start noticing something in this story. There are times in Moses' life where he hesitates and he questions and he struggles. But then there's these women in his life that keep stepping in. The midwives, Moses' mother and Miriam, Pharaoh's daughter and her servants, and then Zipporah here. And over again, you notice that these women, they step in just at the right time. Look, none of these women are Pharaoh. None of them are standing in positions of power in the story. But over and over again, they are right there at the right place at the right time in moments that shape Moses' life. And honestly, that's how it works for us too. The people who shape us most usually aren't the people who are loudest in our life. Usually the people who shape us the most are the people who are simply there for us. The people who are present in our lives, the people who are consistent in our lives, the people who keep showing up over and over and over again in our lives. You know, this past week I was actually helping one of my sons, Luke. We were working on his science project, yet another project for school. Man, those are always fun. For all the parents in here today, y'all can laugh a little bit. It's okay. Those are always fun to help your kids with. But here's what's interesting, though. I actually learn some stuff sometimes when I help them. So, it's a win-win. But while we were researching for his science project, I came across something that really caught my attention because it was something really surprising. And before I tell you what that is, I want to ask y'all something real quick in here today. And I want you to just shout out the answers for me. Unless you're in my household, you're not allowed to shout them out because you already know the answer. What I want you to do is I want you to think about mammals in the animal kingdom that are really good mothers. So if you just think about mammals in the animal kingdom that are really good mothers, what comes to your mind? Lion. I heard what else? Lion. What else? Bears. Elephants. Yeah, all of those good. That's exactly right. That's good. You might think of things like elephants. Or gorillas, or, hey, man, you got me thinking about Wizard of Oz over there. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. But here's the thing. All those are really good answers, but apparently, you know what one of the animals to be considered one of the best mothers in the animal kingdom is? Is the spotted hyena. Who would have ever thought of the spotted hyena as one of the best mothers in the animal kingdom? I'll be honest with you, that's not exactly what came to my mind either, so don't worry. But here's the thing. Researchers have found that hyenas invest an incredible amount of time and energy into their cubs. Actually, some of the most time and energy per cub in the animal kingdom. And when I was thinking about that this week, that makes total sense, right? Because being a great mother usually isn't about those flashy moments. Being a great mother is about presence and consistency. It's about showing up over and over again in our kids' lives. And it made me reflect on my own life. I can't help but think about my mom. Because when we moved up to North Carolina from Georgia, when I was just a wee lad of 4 years old, my mom showed up. She made sure that me and my brother were in church every single time that the doors were open. On Sunday mornings and Sunday nights and Wednesday nights and week in and week out. And honestly, if I'm just being honest, there were times, plenty of times that I didn't really want to go. I would have rather stayed home and done something else. But my mom stayed consistent. She kept showing up. And for a long time, my dad didn't even come to church with us. It was later in life that my dad gave his life to Christ. It was just my mom bringing me and my brother week after week, year after year. And over time, it didn't really seem like a big thing that was going on. It didn't seem like much. It just felt normal at the time. It was just what we did growing up. But man, when I reflect back on those times now, I can see how much those small moments mattered. Because of my mom's faithfulness, I was surrounded by people who loved Jesus and who loved and cared for me deeply. People who taught me truth, people who poured into my life, people who helped shape who I am today. And honestly, that's how God so often works. Not usually through these huge dramatic moments, but through everyday faithfulness. Just people showing up and staying consistent, doing the small things over and over and over again. And those are the small things that oftentimes nobody even notices those things. Nobody even gives people credit for those things. But guess what? God sees those things. And God is using those things in ways that you can't even see right now. Because here's the thing, just like in this story, before Moses ever led a nation, before the sea was parted before his eyes, before any miracle ever happened in Moses' life, God was already at work through women who were just willing to step in right when it mattered the most. And for many of us here today, that's what happened with us. It's because somebody close to us did that exact same thing. And for a lot of us in here today, those people who did that somebody in our life were our mothers. In closing today, I just want us to just step back and think about Exodus 1 through 4 as a whole. And as you do, you start noticing something. The Exodus doesn't begin with Moses standing before Pharaoh. It begins with women. If you read the story carefully, it's actually 7 of them. And if you know anything about biblical storytelling, 7 here in the story is probably not an accident. Some of these 7 women are working together. Some are stepping in alone. Some are named and some are unnamed. We have Hebrew women, an Egyptian woman, and a Midianite woman. And every one of them becomes a part of what God is doing in this story. You've got Shiphrah and Puah standing in the gap and refusing to go along with what was wrong. You've got Moses' mother doing everything she can to protect her child and then trusting God with what she can no longer control. And you've got Miriam, Moses' sister, standing close by, watching, waiting, ready to step in the right moment. Then you've got Pharaoh's daughter seeing a child the world had rejected and choosing compassion anyway. And even the servants standing beside her, helping carry that moment forward. Then you've got Zipporah, Moses' wife, stepping in and acting when nobody else does. Different women in Moses' life. Different moments, different roles, but the same thread runs through them all. These women, they show up, they step in, and they protect life. They trust God with what's right in front of them. And that's still how God works today. Through ordinary faithfulness, through moms who just keep showing up, through prayers that nobody else hears, through sacrifices that nobody else sees, through conversations and consistency and encouragement and correction and love. And most of those moments, they don't feel big, mothers, when you're living them. They just feel like everyday life. They feel like a ride to church and a conversation with your kids, or maybe a prayer before bedtime, or maybe that hard conversation when your kid comes to ask you a question that they're wrestling with. Maybe it's a moment of encouragement for your kid's life, a decision to keep showing up when nobody else sees how exhausting that it is. But when you step back years later, you realize that those moments mattered more than you knew. Because when God tells the story of Exodus, he doesn't skip over these women. He includes them intentionally. Their courage, their compassion, their faithfulness, their willingness to step in when it mattered the most. And for a lot of us, when we look back on our lives, we can see that people have done that for us too. We can see the conversations that we've had and the sacrifices that people have made for us, the consistency and the prayers and the moments that didn't feel huge at the time, but ended up shaping so much of who it is that we are today. And for many of us in here, when we look back on it, just like I've looked back on my life, for many of us, that came from our moms. So today, I just want to say something simple to the mothers in the room. Thank you. Thank you for all you do. If we can just take a moment, if all the mothers in this room can just stand up real quick. Don't be shy. Stand up. This is your time, mothers. Yes, give them a round of applause. Really, thank y'all so much. I promise, just like it's been as I've reflected back over my life with my mom, your kids will one day look back and they will see these moments of consistency. Man, thank y'all. Thank y'all so much. So before we move into this time of communion this morning, I just want to give us a quiet moment. Maybe for you in this moment is to thank God for your mom, for the ways that she showed up in your life, even in moments that you didn't recognize it at the time. Maybe this is a moment for you to pray for the moms in this room right now, that God would strengthen them and encourage them and meet them right where they are this morning. And also, and this is a tough one, if this day carries some extra weight for you, if you're in here today and you've lost your mom, If there's grief there, bring that to God too. He sees you in this moment. Maybe you're here this morning and there's a desire to be a mom, and that just hasn't come to pass yet. Bring that to God too. He sees you too. And maybe for some of us, this is simply a moment to ask God to help us become the kind of people who step in and protect life the way these women did in our story today. So before we come to the table together, if you would just bow your heads and close your eyes for a moment. And in this moment, I just want to pray a blessing over the moms in this room today, over all those who will be and desire to be mothers today. So just be still and receive these words from Scripture right now as a blessing over to you today, moms. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. So just take a moment now, be open and honest before the Lord, and we'll come back to the table and take communion together.